So as I mentioned earlier, my name is Isaac, and I'm one of the pastors here, and I want to tell you a fact about myself. I hate being told no. I hate being told no, especially when I want to do something that I think is a great idea, and then someone says no, and then there's nothing I can do about it. And I share this fact about myself because I bet you're the same as me. I bet none of you here like being told no. It doesn't matter how old you are, where you were born, who your parents are, what you do for a living. I bet none of you like it. And if we're being honest, the older we get and the more powerful we become, the less we're used to even hearing this word, and the less practice we have in actually accepting no for an answer. Well, today we're going to learn about a man who was very powerful and who wanted to do something that was actually very good. But then God told this man no. We're going to see why God says no, and then we're going to see what this man does about it. And this man is named King David. So about 3,000 years ago, David became the most powerful man in all of Israel. He became the king. He conquered a new capital city called Jerusalem. He brought the Ark of the Covenant, which symbolized God's presence, into this new city. He built a palace. He was doing really, really well. And then one day, King David wanted to do something really good. David noticed that even though he lived in a big house, God still dwelt in a tent. And so David thought, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to build a temple, an amazing house for God because I love God. So David told the prophet Nathan about his plan. Nathan gave David the initial approvals to go forward with this building project. But that night, God tells Nathan in a dream that he does not need David to build him a house. Instead, one of David's sons, Solomon, is going to build the temple. Now, God honored David's heart in an even better way. He establishes a covenant with the house of David forever. But in terms of building the temple to David, God says no. Now, in the beginning, it's hard to know why God says no. Who doesn't want a nice house? Also, David seemed to be in a perfect situation to build. He's united all of Israel after a long civil war. He's finally secured peace for Israel from Israel's enemies. And David also has a track record and experience of building things. He's built a palace. He's built a city. He knows how to do this better than anybody else. So why would God say no? Well, here's another fact about myself, something that one of my mentors pointed out to me when I was complaining to him about something. And when I was complaining to him about something, I was analyzing the situation. I was so right. I got it so good. And he said to me, Isaac, you are 100% right about 20% of the picture. You're 100% right about 20% of the picture. My mentor was drawing a distinction between being correct and being wise. A lot of wisdom is about getting that 20% number up and up. So kids, it's kind of like this one Korean proverb about a frog who lives at the bottom of the well. I learned this proverb when my dad told it to me to describe my behavior. So we imagine we have ourselves a frog who's only ever lived at the bottom of a well his entire life. And imagine our froggy friend looks up at the well one day and he sees the sky. But he's only ever seen the sky through the opening of the well. Now, everything the frog says about the sky can be correct. The sky is above me. It changes color during the day. Sometimes rain comes from it. But if that's all that the frog has ever seen of the sky, would you say, kids, that the frog has a full picture of what the sky is like? No, he's 100% right, but only about a tiny part of the big picture. Well, sometimes you and I, we're like that frog, aren't we? Even the grown-ups in here. We only ever see a very narrow path of what's possible, a very small view of what our lives ought to look like, a very limited understanding of how things ought to be. And so even though everything we say might be technically correct about how our lives are supposed to go, we can still miss the bigger picture. But of course, the one who has 100% of the picture, 100% of the time, the one who knows all things all at once is God. And so when God says no to David, when God says no to me, when God says no to you, God does so out of his infinite wisdom and goodness, even when it's hard for us to see. because God can see the whole sky and the whole world, and especially relevant to us, God can see our future in a way that we cannot. That's what's going on in David. So by today's passage, we are at the end of David's life. And right before today's passage, we learn that God has revealed to David the full picture behind why he told David no. So here's what God said. God first says, you're not going to build me a temple because you have shed so much blood before me in all the earth. So what David could not have known when he first tried to build a temple was that he would be in a state of almost constant warfare for pretty much the entirety of his life. So at least one of the reasons why God says no to David is because God does not want someone who's killed this many people to be building a temple. But today I want to focus on a second reason why God says no. And a second reason why God says no comes implied in the following verse. God continues, behold, a son shall be born to you who shall be a man of rest. I will give him rest from all his surrounding enemies. I will give him peace and quiet in Israel all his days. His name is Solomon. He, not you, David, shall build a house for my name. Building something like a temple, especially back then, was very costly, very expensive. But do you know what else was very costly and very expensive? War. And if you think about it, the things you need to build a temple are the same things you need to win a war. You need gold, iron, wood, and a lot of strong young men. And no matter how powerful or rich David might have been, he only has a limited amount of these resources. So friends, have you ever been in a situation where you had too many things competing for your attention all at once? What happens in those cases? Usually, you don't do any of it very well. And you come out of the other side not looking so good. Because you and I, like David, only have a limited amount of time, energy, and resources. So if David went on to try and build a temple and win wars at the same time, split up all the gold, iron, men, and resources he had, it's very likely he would have not done very well on either front. So God saying no to David turned out to be good, not just for Israel, but also good for David. And because David was able to focus on winning wars, he won them all. And because of that, Solomon, his son, could be a man of rest from war and be in a place of peace and quiet, the kind of situation you want someone to be building a temple of worship unto God. And so once God puts it that way, it makes a lot of sense. But let's pause here, because I want to tell you one more fact about myself. And this might not be true for you, but it is definitely true for me. When I'm told no, even if the reasons for the no make sense, and I get it, even if the person who said no to me is someone I trust, even if I know that it's for my own good, I still have a hard time accepting it. That's because I am an emotional guy. People sometimes get confused when I say that because I've been in school too long, but I am a feeler before I am a thinker. And so even if I get it up here, I almost always take a much longer time getting it up in here. So if I were David, and even after hearing God explain all those reasons to me, I would still have a hard time accepting it emotionally. And the emotion I would struggle with would be the feeling of not being able to live up to my full potential. The feeling of not being able to achieve all that I was hoping to achieve in this life. During that time, in David's time of David's part of history, according to the world, the way to achieve success as a king looked a very certain way. You got to have a big family, you got to win wars, but also you got to build something great, a monument or a statue or a temple, something that will outlive you and leave behind a physical sign of your legacy for generations to come. And because God said no to David, David would not be able to achieve this last part. He will never be able to be the kind of king with that kind of accomplishment. So if I were David, I would still have been upset. I would still say something like, God, why did you close this door? We live in a different time and place than David, but I bet some of you are wrestling with God along similar lines. God, why did you say no to me getting into this college? God, why did you say no to me landing this job? God, why did you close this path for me? I could have achieved so much more. I could have reached my full potential. I could have been so much more successful if you had just said yes. And you might know all the Sunday school answers, that ultimately this is part of God's plan and that it's for your own good. Maybe you even heard phrases like, when God closes a door, he opens another, but you're thinking, okay, fine, where's this next door? I'm just stuck. And if that's you, I know how tough that can be. I also want you to consider how David responds, because David does exactly the opposite of how I would have reacted. Instead of becoming upset or resentful or just checking out, David actually, here's what he does. He sets aside a ton of resources for Solomon, 100,000 talents of gold, 1 million talents of silver, bronze and iron in uncountable amounts, a bunch of specialized laborers, all so that Solomon would have enough to build the best temple possible. And then we get to our passage for today. In today's passage, David organizes the Levites. Now, kids, this is a special tribe in Israel that God has set aside for worship unto him. Now, these Levites, they're not going to be doing the flashiest part of the ministry. They are going to mostly do background work, assisting the priests. And then David organizes the priests, and then he organizes the musicians in the chapters after. And the book of 1 Chronicles ends with a great big celebration. Solomon is anointed king. The people give their offering to the Lord to build a temple, and then David rejoices before the Lord. He sings a song of praise. And so David's response to being told no at the end of his life, his response to that is joy. Because David discovered that to truly flourish in every sense of the word in this life, not just in your accomplishments, not just in your careers, not just in your bank accounts, but also in your identity, in your purpose, in your life's mission, to flourish in the way God intends for you, means to no longer live primarily to reach your own potential, but to live so that others can reach theirs. To no longer aim for your own success only, but to aim for the success of others around you. And I know this goes against so much of what the world teaches and assumes. I know this goes against so much of how the world views success. But I think we ultimately know that even though living for yourself feels good at first, it's never as good as helping others succeed and in so doing succeeding with them. Kids, youth, college students, that's why winning as a team always feels better. Adults, grown-ups, that's why study after study shows that workplace satisfaction goes up the more you can explain how your work makes someone else's life better. And those of you in leadership positions, you know that the best leaders are those who build up the ones they lead first. That's what David figures out, and that's what David is doing in today's passage. He has devoted himself to set others up so that they can flourish and reach their highest callings. So he sets up Solomon so that Solomon can succeed in building an amazing temple. And David sets up the Levites so that they could achieve their highest calling, to fully live out what they've always been called to do in the place they've been promised to do it. So even though David doesn't build the temple, David builds people. And maybe for some of you, that is your next step. To no longer strive for your own self, but to use your strength into building up those God has put into your life. And maybe this is the way you're going to build your legacy. Because consider that David's legacy is now that he is the greatest king of the ancient world. And he goes about this legacy in the right way. We know this is the right way, because 1,000 years after David, one of David's sons will go on to live a perfect life in service to others. And his name is Jesus Christ, the Son of David, the Son of God. And so consider, Jesus approaches us with the same heart, but perfectly so. You know, when Jesus came into this earth, he didn't just live for himself. Instead, Jesus emptied himself to become our servant. For, says Jesus, the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. And Jesus lived not to build a fancy monument to his own name, but to build the church, the body of Christ. He lived to build you up to be perfect in glory one day. And to do this, Jesus heard the ultimate no, the full wrath of God for sin that we deserved. He heard that ultimate no in our place on the cross so that you and I could hear God's yes to us. So if you are not a Christian, or you're new to Christianity, or you're not sure if you're a Christian, I'm so glad you're here. I bet you already know what I'm talking about. I bet you already know that living for just yourself is a hollow, empty way to spend your time on earth. And I bet you already know that the best life is a life that makes a difference for others. And maybe you want to live that kind of a life, but you're coming up against your own flaws, your own limitations. You're not sure how to begin. Maybe the world is blocking you at every turn. I want you to know that Jesus Christ lived that kind of a life perfectly for you so that you can start living like him. Jesus lived and died so that he could redeem the broken parts in you, the broken parts in me, the parts that are still selfish and prideful and vain. Jesus died so that you can live the life you already know is worth living. So if you do not know Jesus, would you give your life to him? Because he will take your brokenness, your sin, your failure, your shame, and he will give you his righteousness instead. Would you give your life to Jesus? He is for you. He is for you. Now, for all of us in this room, guys, it's not lost on me. We're reading this passage. We're talking about this. And it's not lost on me that we're about to build a new building. Our new building is going to be amazing. God is doing amazing things in this church. He's doing amazing things in the building committee, amazing things in this building project. He's going to provide us all that we need. And my dream as your pastor, the dream of all of us here in leadership, is that when this building is complete, it would be filled by a people with this kind of heart. A heart that lives for others to the glory of God. And so just as important as building a physical building is going to be, no less important, something you and I can all do first, is to build ourselves up to be the kind of people that shows Jesus to the world. David knew how important it was to build the people even before the building. Because many, many years before David, in the first book of the Bible, in the book of Genesis, God promised Abraham that Abraham's children, the Israelites, would be a blessing to the whole world. And then in the second book of the Bible, in the book of Exodus, God promises that Abraham's children, the Israelites, will be his treasure possession in all the world, and a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. And so when you put those two thoughts together, you realize that this temple wasn't just for the Israelites. It was the way by which Israel would be a holy nation of priests as a blessing to the entire world. David built up the Levites, who built up the temple, who built up Israel, who built up this whole world to draw closer to God's original design, one in which all creation sing praises to the glory of the one true God. That is our calling too. To come together as a church, organized, prepared, on mission together, so that we would not just be a blessing for ourselves, but to the whole world, so that the whole world out there can see that joy is possible because Jesus Christ lives. And here I want to say that I thank God every morning, morning and evening, during my morning and evening devotionals. I thank God that I get to be a pastor at Joy, because you guys are actually doing this really, really well. It might be hard to see, because a lot of ministries faithfully do their work in the background, much like the Levites. But I did a count in preparation for today. On a typical Sunday for our church to run just the Sunday services, about 70 of you serve in some kind of ministry role. I know that's a crazy number. I had to check my math. I busted into Dan and Pastor Jacob's office, and I asked them to check my math too, but it is true. It's about 70 of you. And that's not counting all the small group leaders who lead after church and all the midweek prayer groups and all those who put together our online presence, all these other Levite-type ministries that make our church run. So at any given time, over half of you are serving in some kind of ministry capacity. That's why it's been kind of tough finding a venue to host all of you for Ministry Celebration. It's a good problem that I pray to have every year. You know, I'm a pastor's kid. This is the third church I've pastored at. I've been to many, many more. I have never seen a church like you. So if you are new to our church, I really want to invite you to take a next step and experience what it's like to be loved in this way. Would you fill out a newcomer card, come out to our connection event, sign up for small group in the fall. So many people here want to bless you and love you and build you up. Would you open your heart to being loved in this way by our church, ultimately being loved in this way by Jesus Christ? If you've been going to our church for some time now, you have not been able to find a way to get back in on this. I ask that you guys spend some time in prayer and ask God this week, God, can you help me find a way to get back into ministry? I want to be a part of what you are doing. And finally, for those of you who are serving, Especially those of you who are in those Levite-type ministries, you've been serving for a really long time, and you're starting to feel weary or tired or stuck. I want you guys to do just one thing this week. I want you guys just to remember this week that God is pleased with you. God sees your work, your ministry work, even when it feels like no one else does, and that your ministry work matters to God. David organized the Levites first. Your work matters to the Lord. Would you just take time to remember that this week? So friends, whether you're new, you've been here a long time, you are part of what God is doing here at this church. Let's not just be a church that can build a great building. Let's be a church that God uses to build souls, to build lives, to build joy, to build a world that sees that Jesus is worthy to be praised. Let's pray.